And it's swap it to you. Let's begin now. I didn't say slap it to you. I said swap it to you. Then the best word at right around noon, then we'd say case it to you. We're completed. As you see on the green handout, were the questions that were generated. We want to try to start off with that to begin to briefly try to answer some of them. After that, Dr. Villagomez is going to finish up with storytelling and a couple other things. And right after she's done, we want to do the brainstorming session with, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 of you, especially our veteran staff, to maybe write up a concept that's working in your classrooms, and you can have the floor for some minutes and explain how that's going. So be thinking about that, especially people that have been here. And that's something you may have to deal with in class too. But overall, the purpose for these in-service workshops is to sensitize you a little bit more about Menominee ways. Hopefully, the stuff you're learning here is beneficial to you in the classroom. Say, John Teller talked about that, and this is what I'm going to try to, who knows what scenarios come up each semester in each different class. So, but always, I'm a resource here on the email and everything. That's the best way to do things. If you have questions or comments, feel free to email me or some of the other veteran staff. And Vicki Bisa is a good resource. Of course, Dr. Villagomez is a good resource, and Stephanie Erdman, who has connections to the WTCH radio station. Shano, Stephanie Erdman, but no, just kidding. We always tease her because there's a radio announcer at the WTCH. His name is Doug Erdman. He's a big boy,
Yes.
And somebody, a few years back, they said, "Did you know Stephanie was married to Doug Erdman?" I said, "Oh, gee, yeah, it makes sense, same name, but..." So I went for about 6 months thinking that, well, I don't want to say nothing, but I said, I know Doug, So.
Well, now the rumor that's been told to Wilmer Peters is that I'm a closet alcoholic. The reason that I don't return phone calls is when my home on a binge. So.
It sounds like Brian and Chad.
Yeah.
So that's what we'll try to do here. So the green sheets, no way we're going to get through all these questions, but
oh yeah.
Number 1, what is the true purpose of a poem? To sing, to dance, to socialize, to purchase food, games, sometimes competitions. It's a huge cultural, social event, and I think an actual powwow may have started back in 1920, 1910, as we know them today. In the past, they used the ceremonial songs to dance socially, but about 1960, the concept of a competition, dance for money competition was introduced, and some of the powwows today, there's $150,000 at stake. The first place in the senior men's traditional dance could be $2,000, and some of these people go from weekend to weekend all summer long, and they're in the money. So it's kind of become highly commercialized in some respects as far as the competition powwow, but there are still an equal number, or maybe even more, what we call traditional powwows, where we dance for life and for fun and camaraderie and practice culture. What are the 10 different townships? Because of the nature of our arrangement here with our land, I don't believe they ever identified each township as a name. I think on the map they're listed as Township 17, 18, 19, you know. But no, there's no names to them.
We have, John.
Oh.
But I often hear students identify themselves from certain areas, like I'm a rancher or or raised in, you know, that
Okay.
places where they were raised seem to be really important. Those aren't townships, oh.
Well, some are, but that's not how it's set up. It was a white survey map, it's
Green.
Oh.
Okay, this is, when I meant the 10 townships, I meant, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These two townships here, 1856 treaty to the Stockbridge Mohegan Muncie. Kashina. Okay. This little, about 1,500 acres was purchased about 20 or 18 years ago and put into trust. It was former land, and this area is known as Middle Village. It's very weird. The rest of this land here is part of Shawano County, and this was never granted over to the reservation, even though it is federal land purchased by the tribe. So these people that live here cannot vote in the county elections here. They have to vote in the Shawano County elections. Tribal, yeah, tribal elections, you know, you can vote anyone. Middle Village, somewhere up here is Neopet, Zor, Salt Branch, whoops. Let's see, I gotta do some different color here. Shawano, which means south, actually, you know, it is south, and the Wolf River, let's see, it's going. This is the Wolf River coming down, and this is the west branch of the Wolf. And right next to the river is Highway 55. So up in this area is, over in here is called West Branch. And of course, this is the west branch of the Wolf River, okay. Legend Lake. Is that it? As far as communities go, Kashina, Middle Village, Neopet, Zor, West Branch, South Branch. Okay, so those are the 10 townships, and you know, of course, these are 6 by 6 miles, so it gives you an indication how large. And of course, the interesting feature is that 95% of the reservation is wooded. 60% mixed hardwood, 40% white pine. Of course, we've engaged in logging since 1900. And in 1930s and 40s, and even the 50s, 60% of the forest was white pine, and 40% was mixed hardwood. From a marketability standpoint, white pine is more money. So as you get to know the reservation better, you'll see clear-cut areas, a lot of them. Several thousand acres have been clear-cut, and they're trying to restore or regrow white pine because it's a money-maker kind of lumber. It's straight, you know, and they use it for home building. And a lot of Native people are opposed to clear-cutting. It destroys the aesthetics of the land. And it does disrupt the ecosystem. And they do use Roundup spray for the weeds. You know, and when they do the spraying, they post signs that says, "Do not enter here." You know, there's no animals there. You shouldn't pick the blackberries that are in that area. You know, poison with the Roundup. So just a little note about that, but the ultimate goal is to perpetuate good timber. And last note about that, even though I'm way off track here now, but we do practice what's called a sustained yield cut. We're highly noted worldwide for this type of logging forestry operation, where we only cut a certain percentage of the trees in order to allow for regrowth in the future. We don't ever, very, very seldom do we ever cut 30, 40 acres, cut every tree there. We only take select trees. And we always try to leave a big tree for seed, you know, for the future. And one of our great leaders, Chief Oshkosh, kind of said it all back in 1880, 1870. He said, start on the east side of the reservation and cut trees. Only take the down, the sick, or the ones that only take a few, and you slowly cut your way across the reservation over a course of 30, 40 years. He says, and then by the time you get onto the west side, you can come over here, and everything will have regrown again. And it was a pretty simple concept, and you know, and we follow that today. Not necessarily starting from the east and working our way west. I want to say that because of modern technology, almost literally every tree is accounted for on the reservation. They know how many standing board feet of timber there is on the reservation. You know, the billions. And they have them drawn up in compartments now. Here's white pine, here goes mixed hardwoods, and they cut the forest using a very, very scientific model. Back to the question. Peer group pressures. How does peer group pressure influence one's decision to start and finish a program at CMN? And one of the things we're known for at CMN is that we have many first-generation college students. And at some point, you know, we're getting more second generation. And I think if we didn't have this college here, we wouldn't have a lot of our students here. They wouldn't leave the reservation to go to Madison or Green Bay or Oshkosh and all that. And I believe we're getting a lot of our young, bright Menominee students coming here. And they get a lot of that in high school, pressure to get into college, get a job, better improve yourself. But if you're a first-generation student, college student, and your parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles never went to college, there's, I think, two things happening there. One is, come on, you be the first one, you go. And the other version could be, the hell with that, white man's education, you know, don't get you nothing, you know. I'm not sure how it works, but you probably get both. How do we indigenize math? Whole another subject. Of course, there's ways using the language, but that has to be addressed in more detail and specifics. As a chemistry teacher, instructor at CMN, it would be most useful to know medicinal herbs that the Menominee tribe has used so that we can explore the chemicals that are active in the plant. I believe today that, not globally, the indigenous people knew the medicinal qualities of certain plants and when to pick them and when to, how to use them and how to combine them. And well, we survived many, many thousands of years using the medicines that nature has provided us. There's even a story that one fellow, one of our medicine men, who's long gone now, maybe back in the 40s, 30s or something like that, 1930s, 40s, maybe even 50s. He found a cure for cancer on the reservations because somebody had cancer, and this man, Indian medicine man, doctored that person and cured him. And the person that was cured went back to the doctor and said, well, what did you do? You know, your cancer is gone. He said, well, so-and-so doctored me. So they went to the person and said, no, you could be a millionaire, you know, tell us what you did. But he wouldn't tell. You know, wouldn't reveal what he did. I don't know why. You know, such was the nature of the medicine man. Oral history that I learned. Remember that story? Manny Boyd. Or the medicine man died, you know, where they didn't get a chance to interview him and say, what did you do? What plant did you use? You know?
John, at one point I stumbled across a PDF of an old book that was a compilation of plants used by the Menominee for medicinal and other purposes. And I think I have a copy of it by search.
Huron Smith?
I don't remember any
Ethnobotany of the Menominee, yeah. That's online.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it must have been, because I got a copy of it.
Yeah.
Is that worth considering?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I printed off a copy too, and then the first, the forward is like 16, 18 pages. It gives an explanation about why they use the medicine, where the medicine came from, and how it's hard, you know, then all the great pictures and what it cures, and it's a wonderful book.
Smith?
Huron Smith.
Yeah, and Richard Anamita, back when he was working for the Forest Service, spent a couple of years just trying to locate places where those were still growing and people that knew something about them, if you ever want to copy them.
Yeah, today we have tribal members that are my age or so, have really pursued this in the last, 20 years to revive the use of the native medicinal plants, herbs, roots, bark, berries. And so we're making progress as far as restoring some of that. And it's funny, a lot of the elders just say, I don't know nothing, why, that plant's for this, and that plant is for that, and you pick it this time of the year, but don't ask me, I don't know nothing. No, they say that. Here, they got this wealth of knowledge. I think I want to go as far as number 8, because that's some good ones, and then after that, we'll try to pick it up maybe. How does an instructor help a student address the issue of walking in both worlds? We kind of talked about that on Monday, I think. And in some cases, it is literally walking in both worlds. Some of your students are steeped in tradition, maybe more than steeped in Western cultural ways. Whereas some of your students, your native students, are going to be steeped in Western cultural ways and not much steeping in the native way. So, you can't assume everybody is right off the reservation, or they're out there picking plants every day. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But a person like myself and Dr. Villagomez and Vicki and others, have had to walk in two worlds, to get out there and get into the academia and Madison and Green Bay and Stout and it's tough. But one thing I always did was, I'm in the modern world, but my area of interest and study and research is the native stuff, the native history, the native religion. I've always used that kind of subjugated knowledge to have a success. And I think Dr. Jerome Greeno told it best, that when you're an undergraduate student, you've got pretty much a rote curriculum to follow, do all your basics. But as you get into graduate school, master's level and beyond, you get that academic freedom to pursue and research whatever subjects you like. And I always found that as a Native person, my white instructor, professor, I'd propose the idea of, here's my research paper, and they just, oh, that's great stuff, you know, Native religion, the plants, you know, it was unusual to them, and, you know, because kind of topic of that. And the last one, what do you say to a student that says, you're making me act white, or talk white? What are you going to say about that, Dr. Villagomez, with all your wisdom?
Okay, well, can I take a bigger chunk than that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you might as well segue right, well, no,
Okay.
let's do the storytelling next, then we'll go.
Okay. That's a difficult one, and I've been doing a lot of work in the area of discussing standard English, and then something that we're starting to call Menominee Indian English. Years ago, like in the 1990s, there was this person named Leap who did a study. I think he was an anthropologist, I'm not positive. Did a study on what he called American Indian English, and he thought that Native people did not speak standard English, but they spoke a variation of their tribal language and English. And so for years I worked with my sisters because they're all teachers in the school district. And one of the things my sister Lisa, the social studies teacher, would say is that she swore sometimes her students didn't understand English and they weren't speaking English, because she would give quizzes and tests and whatnot. And so we started talking about this William Leap and his American Indian English, and we decided that Menominee people speak Menominee Indian English, which is a combination of English and Menominee. And there's a whole history. We could talk for hours about it. But I think that's important for you to understand, and maybe talk to your students about what's called code switching, where students in one setting can use Menominee Indian English, but if they're in a formal setting, in school, business, their job, they would need to use standard English or talking like a white person. That's something that will be useful to them, and it's a skill. It's a skill set, and I think one of my old students who went on to be a very successful teacher would get criticized when she was doing her student teaching, and they would criticize the way she spoke. Okay, so they couldn't explain to her what was wrong. But what's happening, and I thought about this for years because she was just an excellent student, and I thought, why did she have so much trouble in her student teaching with her speech? It's because she was using Menominee Indian English, and she wasn't using standard English. And I think those of you who use standard English, just do it naturally. And so it's very difficult for you sometimes to realize how difficult it is for a student who's coming in speaking Menominee Indian English to switch over to the standard English and to understand it's okay. It's okay. We code switch. Vicki.
We had a discussion yesterday in our department meeting that was related to this. And, obviously you can have that discussion about the formal language and conversational and how each are valid. But one strategy that we were given, and we were told that we could, or should actually, make them use that formal language in the classroom, and correct them if they were saying things like use, and we were really hesitant about that, and thinking, it didn't seem like a good idea to us, but we were curious to know what you guys would think.
No, I wouldn't. Well, I shouldn't say that, I'm new here.
I think you guys are doing a good job, yeah.
Let's say talk.
That's the unfortunate thing.
Yeah.
There's the correctionist approach, which is what I think you're talking about, and then there's an approach where it's much more gentle, and where you talk about, you know, okay, here you can use Menominee Indian English, but here I want you to use standard English, and so use guys is not going to be an acceptable term. But I've heard people do presentations here already and heard them use guys.
Yeah.
So I have a book on code switching, and I'll share it with you. You can take a look at it. In fact, I'm going to put it in the library so people can look at that. But it's a...
Someone else was first, or? Oh,
Dr. Hall had something.
Oh, I was just gonna comment that that ballpark is a soccer book you're talking about.
Famous quote was, let's take the best things from the white man and use them to make a better life for ourselves. The kettle, the knife, the power saw, you know, the car. And then, not only on top of that is the concept of resiliency. I think that if the native people were not highly resilient, we never would have survived. And maybe the people of Great Britain never would have survived the Romans, too, if they didn't have resilience, too. But the other issue that came up, too, was that there's a whole history of language acquisition, whether it's learning Menominee language today, or if it was learning English from the old-time people. And I'm told that English is extremely difficult to learn. It takes a lot of work because of the nature of the language. But one thing is, and I think it's in our DNA, the concept that sometimes I saw the dog doesn't always sound good. The dog, I saw him. Sometimes like other Romance languages, the object subject are shifted. Yeah, so I think that's. Because a lot of times in my language research of Menominee, I would say, Case na wah hino hanem. I saw that dog. But the elder would say, well, that's good enough. But you could say no hanem case na wah. They say it the other way. So this sounds better. You know? So when the English teacher in the boarding school would say, okay, I see the dog, you know. And the Indian might say, dog, I see him. Oh, you know, it's supposed to be. Well, I didn't mean to do that, but that may well have happened with a 3-foot stick, a meter stick. So it was in their DNA, I think, to speak that way. And so we've had to adapt. On the whole subject of language, then I want to go into storytelling quick because we need to finish up her storytelling stuff. My granddaughter, she's 10 years old, and she goes to school in Shawano. Now, she used to go to Lincoln School, elementary school, and there were several Menominee students in there. There's 200 students or so, about 50, 45 were Indian. Some Chippewa, Oneida, and Chippewa and everything. And so she had friends that were white and friends that were native, you know. And one of her little friends was another Menominee girl. And I think the Menominee girl might have came from Kashina and went and bused there, whatever, you know. So they're on the playground playing, and the one girl says to my granddaughter, let's talk like we're from Kashina, okay? You know, they're playing. You know. Okay. So I said, how did that sound like? Holy right, what you doing there? Oh, holy right, you know. They knew at that age that there is a resonic difference. That they kind of talk like that sometimes, even though I'm glad to be in school here at college, Menominee Nation. Diddly, man. No, you know, I don't know if you ever heard it quite that pronounced, but there's a definite accent, there's word usage that is unique to this area. And I think as you get to your bachelor's, masters, and PhD, you kind of clean up your accents, but even though you get back into the heart of the reservations, hey, what's happening, man? You know, scoop on you, you know. You can go back to that, you know. I can, anyway. It's actually sometimes kind of fun just to speak any way you are, as opposed to being very formal here in the 10 o'clock news. So,
You want to go?
yeah, I'm going to do this quick thing and then we're on to you. One of the key concepts that we didn't address yet, and it's going to come out, but how do we indigenize the curriculum? You know, that's what we're trying to do here, in a sneaky kind of way. But that's not going to be lost. But to move on to storytelling, this is important because I want to segue into her stuff, Dr. Villagomez. The sacred legends are only told in the wintertime, when there's frozen water and there's snow out there and it's cold out. That's the only time of the year when we tell the sacred legends, because in some of the legends we're talking about some of the evil spirits and everything, and you know, you stand a risk of being harmed. And one thing about Menominee is we're highly superstitious, I guess, you know, and some of the old stories are still current. I guess the word is superstitious, you know, a lot of that, you know. And every year around January, middle of January, we'll have a special session. We've hosted a few here on this campus to have a sacred storytelling session. And everybody's invited, and a little bit ceremonious, and we can tell them sacred stories then, without fear of harm. But there are other legends that are okay to tell this time of the year, right now. And, well, it's the legend of Spirit Rock. And that's a marker up on 55. It's about 2.5 miles north of Kashina on Highway 55. There's a monument on the rock, that historical marker, and it kind of outlines the story. And that gives most of the story. There's a few parts more that I want to tell. Then after I get done telling the story of Spirit Rock, I want to turn it over to Dr. Villagomez. Many, many years ago, who's to say thousands, the Menominee tribe was suffering, struggling. Maybe there was a drought, famine, or something, sickness in the tribe. And there was apparently no help in sight. But the chief, one of the chiefs told 7 young men, young, healthy, young warriors, you need to go get help somewhere. So where do we go? Go east. So they packed up food and their weapons, and off they went. And then they said, well, where are we going? He says, I don't know, until you find help. And they were gone many, many days. I don't know how far west they were. And they ran out of food, and they got lost, and they were starving. Pretty soon, several days without food, they gave up. They laid down on the ground, and so I guess we're going to die, you know. So, in that, as they were sleeping, a voice from above spoke to them. Said, "Boys, wake up! This is God talking, or one of the spirits. I know why you're here. I'm here. I want to help you." The voice said. He says, "Each one of you." This is almost like the genie in the bottle thing. I want to give you a wish, something to help your people, you know. And so he told the first young man. He says, "What is your wish, you know?" He says, "Well, I want to be a chief." "Okay, granted, you're going to be chief." Next one, what about you? He says, "Well, I want to learn to be the excellent hunter, so I can provide food. Boom. He says, you'll learn how to make special weapons. You'll learn how to track, how to trap. Third one, I want to be a fisherman. On down each one asked one to be doctor. Okay, or you're going to learn all the medicines to cure your people. It got to the sixth young man. He says, well, what do you want? He says, well, all the other stuff's been taken. He says, I want to live the longest of all the tribe. I want to live a long time. So the Creator made him into a tree, oak tree. He says, you're going to live 300-400 years. The last one said, okay, I want everlasting life. The Creator says, okay. He made him into a stone. And there's a stone up there inside of the road called Spirit Rock, and some people have said that that's not there were other stones like that had sacred, but even though that stone used to be 4.5 feet tall, today it's only this big, and it's shaped like a man or something, shaped like a person. But the legend goes on to say that when the rock is completely gone, the Menominee race will be extinct, forever gone. And well, for some reason the rock is crumbling, and it's a granite kind of rock, and there's pictures of it. It used to be real big. Now it's real small. I don't know what's going on. I mean, it's good for several hundred years yet. I think, as far as the legend goes, that it's going to crumble away, then the race will be extinct. So that's a legend, a well-known Menominee legend. There are hundreds of them, hundreds of legends, almost for every part of life, it seems. And many times the legends were more than just a story. There's a message in the story. Okay? And this one was pretty obvious, I think, but there are others that had hidden message about don't do this because that'll happen. Don't do that because this will, But I think I'll make a commitment now to say that in mid-January we should have a sacred storytelling session, and everybody's welcome. And when the last time we had one here, we had 100 people. We had apple cider and cold night. It was very nice. And we try to bring in some of our best storytellers from the reservation. So,
Hey, John, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but back in the 60s or something, I'm a quick Bill boy, there was some rumor about Spirit Rock being moved or stolen as a prank or something. Do you know anything about that, or is that just something? It seems to me it was stolen for a period of time, and then it was supposedly brought back, and there was some question as to whether or not it was the real one or not.
Well, that's what I'm thinking too. That I've heard that too. That may not be the real one, but for the purpose of historical markers, they might have chosen one. They said there are other Spirit Rocks. Whether the original got moved, and I don't know. But I do know that the city of Oshkosh some years back wanted Chief Oshkosh's bones to be buried by the monument in Oshkosh. And they asked the Menominees, we want them bones, come on. And apparently some bones were sent, but they weren't Chief Oshkosh's. Yeah, here he is, the chief, they got him, secure. So,
Yeah, I just...
Similar. But Dr. Villagomez started the whole presentation on integrating storytelling as a teaching tool, and it's a tall order, I think. Because I know some of you do it already, but with the right story, the right circumstance, personal story or a story serves as a strong learning tool for all people, not just Native, but seems to have a lasting impression. Maybe like I was telling about my granddaughter, and she was meeting her Brandon and John trying to talk like the rest. I think that one will stay with you, huh? But, turn it over to Dr.
You might. I wanted to just share with you about this Menominee Indian English, because I think this is a complicated subject and topic, and obviously the college is talking about it and discussing it. That it's something I think we'll need to continue to look at and discuss. I know you know that we just received a big grant in the education department to work on literacy and whatnot. We will be working with the Head Start program, and I will be doing a presentation on Menominee Indian English and Standard English and this idea of code switching, because most of the teachers in the Head Start program are Menominee, and so of course they speak what? Menominee Indian English, and so that's something that we're going to be taking a look at, is Menominee Indian English and Standard English and that kind of thing. So I think on August 24th, I think I'll be doing a presentation with the teachers in kind of a training session, and I think you would be welcome to attend if you would like. What do you remember from yesterday about storytelling? Just off the top of your head, what do you remember?
Well, stories could kind of serve the purpose of making a point.
Okay.
And I think they're more vivid. As John pointed out, I think you remember them a little more than rather just reciting some text.
Okay.
I'll just say there's a beginning, middle, and end to it.
Okay.
So that,
Sometimes.
yeah, well,
I remember the point about making an emotional connection.
There's an emotional connection with storytelling. Anything else that you recall? You don't have any notes. Oh, no. Anything else?
Well, it's a way of passing of knowledge, and the idea that things weren't written down originally. And
Right.
so this is going back to the
Stories
beginning.
are as old as time.
Mhm.
They're passed down by word of mouth from generation to generation.
John, if you go back to that one PowerPoint that has, that one right there, we didn't get to this, but you know, the idea of informal, formal formats. Why is urban legends on the informal format?
In the informal?
Yeah.
Because those are stories that have been passed down by word of mouth, and they're kind of informal stories, and there's hundreds of them.
Yeah, okay.
And so every student knows these urban legends, you know, the person in the back of your car, the hook on your, that's stuck on your door, but you will be using informal storytelling if you use storytelling in your classroom. You won't be using the traditional. Couple things I wanted to reinforce with you is that storytelling is an example of that subjugated knowledge. And when we talk about subjugated knowledge, because John wants to touch on that, I think, a little bit more, subjugated knowledge is the knowledge that Western culture has disrespected. And it's the knowledge that indigenous people have that has not been used in school, has not been valued in school. And so that's why I want to emphasize the idea of using storytelling, because it does connect with our students, because Menominee students have strong mental traditions of storytelling, and it was valued by our tribe. Now, I told you some stories already that were used at the high school level. Now I want to share this one with you, because I actually used it in the college setting. I taught children's literature, and one of the things that I always discussed was traditional literature. Traditional literature is very important. Students have to have that knowledge of traditional literature in order for them to understand many things that they read, because it goes back to the same motifs and patterns. Mythology is a very important part of mythology. The story John shared with you today could be called mythology. Those are sacred stories that different cultures believe. Joseph Campbell is one of my heroes, even though not everyone thinks he's a hero. I do, kind of like Richard Nixon. And I always tell my students that he's an important person to use when they begin to look at mythology. And for you, when you begin to think about your worldview and expanding your worldview, changing your worldview, you may want to study Joseph Campbell a little bit, because I think he will help you to do that. Here's the story that I tell when I introduce Joseph Campbell to my students. Joseph Campbell, when he was a young boy, lived in New York City. And his parents took him to the Wild Bill West show in the 1900s, early 1900s, and he loved it. He absolutely loved it. He became so fascinated with Indians after seeing that show, and I'm forgetting what Lakota chief was. I looked it up to see who was the chief that would have been in the Wild West show.
Sitting Bull was there for a bit.
But it was after Sitting Bull. He didn't get to see Sitting Bull or Black Elk. But he went there and he was just so fascinated that he started to read everything he could. He went to the library in libraries in New York City, and he was always reading the books about Native Americans so he could learn as much as he could, and he became so fascinated with Native Americans. And many people credit Native Americans and his interest in Native Americans for helping him to become one of the foremost experts in mythology in the world. It helped him to gain that respect. One day, his mother took him to the movies. And of course they went to a Western. So there they are at this movie theater, they're watching this Western. And of course the white people are killing the Indians. And everybody's cheering like crazy in the theater. And what do you think happened? He got angry. He got upset. He had strong beliefs. He must have been a truly gifted and talented student. He got angry and he got upset. He stands up in the middle of this theater and he starts yelling at the people watching the movie, and he says, "Stop! You wouldn't act this way if you really knew the truth." And his poor mother was absolutely mortified as she was dragging him out of the theater so he wouldn't embarrass the family any longer. So that, I'm kind of like that, the father in, what is it, My Big Fat Greek Wedding? Because I like to share this with my students so they see, you know, how a marginalized people, as Native Americans are, could have such a profound effect on someone and on mythology. Could I see the next slide? Because one of the things that Joseph Campbell did for Native Americans is that he had such a reverence and an understanding for Native American culture that he shared it with the world. A wonderful book is The Power of Myth that you may want to read, or there's videos with Bill Moyers that I think would be interesting for you to look at and maybe easier to use on those Saturday nights when you have nothing else to do. But one of the things that he did was he explained the difference between Western culture and Native Americans. And he used the Plains Indians as an example, and their relationship with the buffalo, for instance. And that was just I think it was in the 1870s where, you know, the buffalo were absolutely decimated, and they were a sacred part of the Plains Indian culture. So you can imagine what impact that had on the Plains Indians. And so if their social fabric was disrupted and whatnot, we could understand why that would occur. But one of the things that he emphasized was the difference in how Western culture looked at something and how Native Americans might look at something. And I think John touched on this a little bit, but with the buffalo, the Plains people viewed the buffalo as a thou and not in it. And it was an object of reverence. Now, why would that make a difference? Why would that make a difference? Why would the worldviews be so different because of that?
Oh, because you're not putting humans above others.
Exactly. Some things to remember as I talk about storytelling, because I know we want to always, know that this is somehow, why it's valid. Stories help to make that emotional connection with our students. The right story is difficult to choose. You have to know your students. You have to know what they will relate to. But once you make that emotional connection, they're going to remember what you're teaching. Hot cognition. Stories can help students by giving them a retrieval cue. Many times, if you're working with students that don't have a strong background knowledge, it's difficult for them to connect to something that they don't know anything about. So if you can give them a story, because it's part of our mental traditions, oral tradition makes the curriculum relevant to your students' culture. Storytelling uses your students' strengths, and it can be a powerful introduction to a lesson. And it doesn't have to be long. In fact, it should be short, probably 5 minutes or less. Shouldn't be the major part of your lesson, but it can be powerful, as you saw with Faithful Elephants. I could have done another story that was equally emotional when I talked about myths. Can we go back to Silco? I love this Leslie Marmon Silco. She's a Una Pueblo woman. Vicki's probably familiar with her writing. She wrote a beautiful book called Ceremony. That's an excellent example. But I want to read this quote because I think it's interesting and it touches on the power of the spoken word. Because Western culture so disrespects the oral tradition. Where I come from, the words most valued are spoken from the heart, unpremeditated and unrehearsed. Among Pueblo people, a written speech or statement is highly suspect because the true feelings of the speaker remain hidden as she reads the words that are detached from the occasion and the audience. So, and she says many other things that are very powerful too. But I thought that was something that I wanted you to take away from here today. Okay.
Just maybe one follow-up thought about storytelling, or rather, she mentioned before, subjugative knowledge. And I didn't want to say too much about that other than your students do bring unique knowledge to the classroom, maybe related to the subject that you're teaching. But, about halfway through the semester, you get to know your students pretty well, and you start to figure out what kind of special knowledge each of your students are bringing to the classroom. And somehow you need, as a good teaching skill, you try to tap into that knowledge that they bring, and that gives the student a more success, I think. just like the elder that says, well, I don't know none of these, I don't know nothing, you know, but this plant is for that, you know, you pick it this time of the year, and that plant, you know, that subjugated knowledge that they have, if you can find that, that lends itself towards success. And you all know that already, I'm just reminding you. Brainstorming. I want to call on you all, and or a few of you, to take the floor and maybe write down, or maybe you don't even have to write down, but maybe come up to the front and share what's working in your classrooms. I kind of asked you yesterday, Monday, to think about this, and I guess that this is a good sharing tool for the new teachers, the new staff members. You can give some advice as to what's working with regard to integrating native things into the curriculum, because that's what my assignment was here, even though that's an ongoing process to integrate the curriculum. So, do we have any volunteers? Do you need the whiteboard?
I think that was,
Marie and Vicki and
yeah.
Dennis, Bill, and, you know, the ones, you want the,
I don't really, no, I don't. This is a quick one.
you know, you see it, you read it, you hear it.
Hey. This is a real, I was chatting with Dr. Villagomez in the parking lot yesterday and told her about
Early in the morning,
early in the
at
morning,
7 o'clock.
something I do. I just started it this year actually, and it went really well. It's a real quick storytelling thing. I do it the very first day of class, and it's a way to introduce myself to students and have students introduce themselves to each other. And it's called Fact or Fiction. It's really an icebreaker. It's an icebreaker, but it's also a sort of storytelling thing, I think. So what I do is, on my PowerPoint slides, I have two separate photos of our daughters, Tara and Becca, who happen to be born 10 days apart. So I have their birthdays under their pictures. I have two daughters born 10 days apart, fact or fiction. How can they be born 10 days apart? Oh my gosh. What happened there? They must be adopted. Blah, blah. So we go around the room to each student, you know, fact or fiction. Do you think that's fact or fiction? And almost all of them say fiction, because how can girls be born 10 days apart? And then I say, no, it's a fact. They're stepsisters. And so then everybody laughs, and that's funny. And then I have another slide of the rest of the family, and so I talk about our kids and our grandkids and blah, 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 blah. And I just see the students so interested in my family. And it's really easy for me to talk about my family. In fact, I have to shut myself up sometimes, especially when I'm talking about my grandkids. But all the students connect to that. And then we go around the room, and each student has to make a statement that's fact or fiction. So they're, in essence, telling a mini story. And they come up with the funniest things. It's just great. We all laugh and have a good time, and they remember each other if they don't know one another, and they tease each other about it for the next few weeks. And it's a real easy thing to do the first day of class, and it's real fun. That's my storytelling.
And make your best statement with each student, do you go around class and ask that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do it the same way. And so sometimes they come up with these, what sound like really crazy things, and it's true. Or sometimes their fiction things are just, it's so much fun.
Next.
I guess I can. I don't have much to write on the board, and what I have to talk about, I don't know if it's so much integrating it into the curriculum because it deals with American Indian Lit, which that's all about the culture, so it's there. But I can tell you about a couple things that I've really noticed with Native students that come up every single semester when I teach that class. And the first one is probably fear of sharing, which I know isn't unique to Native literature. It's everywhere. So they have a real fear of sharing. The other thing is identity is a big issue with a lot of students, but maybe not in the way you might think. And then the last one, there was one other thing. Maybe I'll start going and it'll come to me what that last one was. But one of the things with Native literature is oftentimes that's the only literature class that they've had or ever will have. So they come into class and a lot of them will read the text and they can comprehend what it's saying, but they don't have any experience with looking at subtext or dealing with literary criticism or symbolism or anything like that. So they're all really afraid of that. So if I approached it from the standpoint of this is what you're supposed to get out of this text, then it's like crickets chirping, nobody wants to share. But rather than do that, we talk about how literature is up to interpretation. And really, I'm looking for to see what they can get out of that literature. And the way that they do that is by using their experiences and their frame of reference to interpret it. And that there isn't really a wrong answer because your experience is your truth and that's valid. And as long as you can point to an example in the text, then it's your truth, it's not incorrect. And that seems to make a huge difference because when they start realizing that it's right, what they have to say is right and it's valid, then the floodgates open and they're really willing to share and they get excited about that. The other thing is that I see, and maybe this is because we look at literature we start off by discussing, what does it mean to be Indian? Who's an Indian? Who has a right to write about Native people? And that's something new that they hadn't really thought about. So we have a lot of discussion on that. And I'm probably at a little advantage because I can talk to them using examples from my own background. It seems to me that students they don't have an issue with their identity. I'm not to say all, but I kind of see this come up a lot, is they really feel they know who they are as Native people. They define themselves that way. And they don't question it. But what they seem to have a fear of is how other people perceive them. So we look at identity, and I'll tell them the story of when I was 17 and I was working up on my reservation and the tribal supermarket and just opened, and probably 98% of the employees were Native people. And we had a bus come from Eau Claire, and it was a bus of elderly people, and they came up to tour the reservation. And I had this elderly lady come through my checkout line, and she gets up to me and she leans in and she whispers, "We came up to see the Indians." And I'm like, "Really?" And I said, "Did you see any yet?" No. So that's really funny. So we start talking about what it means to be Indian and who can write about Indian people. And then they start talking about their own experience as Native people. And they're probably in my boat. There's a lot of lighter-skinned Native people, people who haven't been raised on the reservation or don't have the benefit of being able to learn the language or the culture. So even though that's how they define themselves, they know themselves as Indian people but nothing else, but they worry about how other people perceive them. They worry about the fact that they are lighter skinned, so people aren't going to see them as Indian people, or that they're being questioned. And it's like when they share and you have all these different stories, it validates them. And it's like, I don't think that's something that they openly really discuss a lot, but when they hear other students have those same fears, it's just a validation, and they really speak to that. Another thing we discussed in there, one of my favorite things that they seem to like too, is we look at Indian romance novels. And we actually will take turns reading from Indian romance novels. And a lot of students will have read them, and I tell them, that I've read them before, and my mom is a big Indian romance novel reader. And we start talking about what that means, and they have a lot of fun with it. And it kind of opens their eyes to things they haven't ever thought about. So once they start moving beyond just being able to comprehend the words on the page, then they start thinking about, well, this is what this could mean. And when I don't tell them necessarily what they're supposed to think, and they're bringing things out, they say some really profound things, really profound, and it's just amazing. And we had Mark Turcott come in last year, and he essentially said the same thing, so that sort of validated me, that he doesn't want to tell them what to think, that their experience is their experience, and he wants them to interpret it that way. And it's just like that freedom and that safety net where they can share is so important to them, and they really respond to that, so that's about all.
Thank you, Vicki.
Say, John, I don't know if I have to give, I just want to kind of comment a little bit about that fear sharing thing, you know, and I think that's very important, just kind of hitchhike on what you said there. You know, as a white teacher, you know, I get up in front of the room, and many times I feel like the first 2 or 3 meetings at least, I'm being sized up. You know, this guy trustworthy, this guy, I've been around a little bit, so people kind of know me sometimes, but, so, this lack of trust, now we do have an essay that's a narrative, which is really telling a story. And I know these kids have some great stories to tell, but without the trust, I don't think they say, well, I'm going to tell a real safe one, because they have some better ones. And so that's the problem I have sometimes, is getting them to trust me enough to actually tell some of the better stories that they have a little more emotion to them, a little more feel to them. And I do think that, you know, you go, the idea of, I also have on the other, the reverse, with being an older person, you know, I really think the Menominee culture has it right about respecting elders. You know, the white society, you hardly even hear the word elder. You know, we even have elder parking here. You know, over there, I'm an old geezer, an old fart, and I come over here, and I'm an elder. And, you know, sometimes I use that to my advantage, too, trying to discipline the kids with using texting and all that stuff. I say it's not respecting your elders, I say. And I think I get more mileage out of that than trying to scold them for having text message and things like that. But my point is that I think as a white teacher, I think these students have these storytelling abilities, but it's important to get the trust. And once you've got that, then they'll just sail with stuff. You know, I found that once they have that going. So I think the fear of sharing that Vicki brought up is somewhat of a problem. You know, trying to get the students, and not only Indian students, but also whites, as they get them to the point where they will actually tell the story.
I should have said that too, that it is with the non-Indian students, and especially in a native lit class, they're really afraid of saying something incorrect or, you know, so, but once we get going and they see that there's really a lot of common experiences that they have, they can relate to in that material, and that things open up for them as well, so.
Yeah. Well, you don't, for me too, you know, sometimes you're a teacher and they think, well, you're the teacher, you got stuff. But I do tell stories too. I tell, you know, just to make it a little more human for me, try to make a point too. You know, the time I made the front page of the Milwaukee Journal for hitting a cop during a riot over in school, you know, so I tell that story. And they kind of say, well, this guy, well, he's not perfect, you know, he's got a little past here too. And I try to make a point that you know, you can learn from your mistakes, because it was a big turning point in my life, you know, that time. So turn a negative into positive. So I think, I guess my point here is that it's just important to get the trust, and once you have that, then the kids will stay.
Yeah, why don't we go until 10:30 or so, we'll take a break after that, but any more success stories? Mr. Bill and Vince? Yes, sir.
I've never taught here, but in my past, I used to teach GED courses on an island called Saipan, Chamorro people. One thing that I found was really interesting with regard to this trust thing, and maybe it might be interesting to others for me to share this. One of the GED essay topics was tell about a time where you faced a serious challenge and how you overcame it. And so what I would do is I would actually on the board write that essay, honest me, you know, how I would respond to that, and then just seeing me model that. So that's kind of the core thing I'm trying to get across, to model, you know, just being honest and humble as much as I can, you know. I found that opened students a great deal.
You know, one of my, well, it's in my top 10, I think, an Indian movie, Dances with Wolves. I've watched it about 5 or 6 times, which is a lot for me. Funny, you know. But one of the, you know, there's a story there, you know, about the war and the buffalo and everything. But one of the things I most enjoy about the movie is that the Indians love to laugh. You know, the different jokes in the language, and that's very much the way it is today. I don't know if it's any more than the Irish or the English or the French, but humor. If you can inject a little bit of humor now and then, and it's hard to do, I know, because my wife always says, leave the comedy to the comedians, you know. But at the same time, she's laughing at me, you know, but at my little jokes. If your timing is right, you can slide in a few humorous tidbits, you know. But if you can use that to your advantage as a teaching tool, and to get them to relax and to develop trust, that's a good thing. Mr. Bill, share all your wisdom with us.
Things I wanted to mention. I guess this has been mentioned already. The may not even dream about telling peers, you know, just being vulnerable like you did, Ken. So that's one, I think, important thing. And once you show yourself to be vulnerable, that will open them up to share too.
One thing I do at the beginning, the very first class is, I like to be the geographer, I like to travel. So I ask them not only their name, but where's the furthest place they ever went? That could be just down the road, it could be across the ocean, and that leads to all kinds of stories. Well, I asked them, what were you doing there? Or when did you go there? Or who did you go there? What did you do there? That kind of stuff. And the very first class, they start sharing things about, and then I know something about them. Oh yeah, they used to live in Arizona, or they lived here their whole life. Something about them.
The other thing is, we have a thing, it's about a month into the course, I ask them to make a poster. And I say, what is sustainable development? Because that's the course that I do this. What does it look like to you? What does it look like? There's no right or wrong. I just give them a big sheet of paper. I said, fill it up with your visions of what this whole idea, from your past, from your historical perspective, what does it look like? I don't want any words. I just want pictures. And they work in groups. At first they just stare at it and they're not sure what to do, but man, then they start. I said, go to magazines, go to the internet, do whatever you want. So some of them just go outside and put in sticks and twigs and leaves, that's fine. I said, but you have to justify what that means to you. What does this have to do with sustainability? Whatever you put on that piece of paper. So they have a great time as a group, and there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong. But what they get graded on is, did they work together? Did they put something on the paper? Did it look like they thought about it for a while? And I love those posters. They're beautiful. And then the last thing is, at the end of the course, and this is sort of their final paper, I ask them, of all the things we talked about this whole course, this whole semester, what does it have to do with you? What does it have to do with you? This whole idea of sustainability. How does it apply to your life? And those papers, I get reflections on, like I remember one really vivid. The guy says, I work in the casino and I clean the floors. At first I didn't know what this had to do with, because I said, what does that have to do with your job, with your family, with your career aspirations, anything in the world? What does it have to do with you? He said, well, at first I wasn't sure what to, I clean the floors at the casino, but he says, after I thought about it, I started to read the bottles. What's in the ingredients in the stuff that I'm using? I started to monitor how much is thrown away and how much of the stuff is recycled. He said, and after I got all that information, then I started to talk to my supervisor. Maybe we shouldn't be doing so much of the, we're throwing away more away than we're recycling.
So he could put that into his context. Other people talk about, how they're gonna raise their kids different, or, and those papers, there's no really right or wrong. It's, all I wanna know is, does this have any application to your life? So every paper is different. And, I think that respects who they are, where they come from, what they, it's not like they're just regurgitating stuff that we talked about. They get to share what they've learned and what it means to them.
Subjugated knowledge.
Subjugated knowledge, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Van Lopen. It's nice to get a little pitter patter,
Yeah, I feel it.
I'm going to make a comment I want to make a comment on what you had to say. This past week, they did the portfolio presentation to ICD because half the class was taught here and half the class in Green Bay. So they were giving when I was in Green Bay listening. And of those people that gave their portfolios, there were a couple of them that really highlighted the idea of sustainability and diversity. In fact, in terms of what they got out of their whole educational experience here, and one of them in fact started saying, well, before I came to school at CMN, I really didn't think too much about sustainability and diversity, maybe not at all, in fact. However, now, and they both just had it really centrally in terms of what it meant for their lives. And I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you.
Is anybody taking notes on this stuff? Because it's worth printing, I think, some of this. Okay, I didn't.
Well, it's something sad. If you wanted me, I could sit here, I suppose, but...
No, you gotta have you up here, because see the people. Then next to me, Dr. Vickers.
I've been here 6 years, so I guess that makes me one of those. But, so I want to talk a little bit about what I do, and it ties a lot to what a lot of everyone else does, but one of the things I do, I teach American Indian Theater, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but to my knowledge, it is the only American Indian Theater class in the country. And so when I came here, that was a title. It wasn't, every class had been different. And so I went about it, it's similar to what Vicki said does. It's Elizabeth Cook Lynn, she's Crow Creek, Lakota. She challenges the idea of who should and what should be written about. She calls this nationalism. She writes pro-native literature. John Smeltzer is Alaskan Athabascan, and he has the other side. He says that we can write about whatever we want, Native people being we. And so I bring this forward, and I ask what are the thoughts on that. The most popular American Indian character is Injun Joe, period. It's obviously from Tom Sawyer. There's 9 books written by American Indians that are fiction, published before 1969. American Indian theater, as we know it, arguably started in 1939, but in 1969, it was considered, this is something new with Nate Gigama, who was Kiowa, Delaware. Started in 39 with Lynn Riggs, who was Cherokee. Where I'm going with all this is Edgar Allan Poe and the American Romantics were legitimized in 1953 when F.O. Matheson wrote American Renaissance. At this point, he said, these people are worth studying. And then they entered the canon of what was studied. So it's not been 50 years, but it sort of has been since 39, or it's been, I guess, 100 years. So how long do we have to wait to define what constitutes American Indian theater, or for that matter, American Indian literature? And then I tell the students, all right, you tell me. Say we're opening a bookshop that says American Indian literature. Are you going to put the Adventures of Tom Sawyer on that shelf? And what I'm doing is posing the question so that people write down their opinions. I do not grade based on it, really anything except for if you answer the question. But I do grade it fully for grammar. I write down what they would have gotten, but I don't take off. And that starts the question. So you probably realize I agree with William S. Yellow Robe Jr., who's a Assiniboine, who says that any Native literature and Native people, they represent their tribe, their culture, their everything. So whenever I have a student who brings up a Native person, I'm interested in their tribe. And not necessarily when you brought up, of course, Sitting Bull, the Sioux, but Hunpapa Sioux. I'm interested in that. And so I always ask, well, what Sioux? What person? Why would that be of interest? And or I guess, what would their culture bring, where they're from? And I guess I have another advantage in that I am a super nerd. So when you say that the survival and how culture has, I think of the Iroquois tradition of the end of the wood ceremony, or the edge of the wood ceremony, and how that helped the Iroquois survive. First thing and last thing is a book where they tried to write Native people out of existence, saying you participated in the 4th of July, therefore you are assimilated. And so I will bring up these sources, and I have that, but and I guess since I'm a super nerd, But one thing that I think that I would advise to everyone is, of course in business they call it a sandwich. You compliment, you put in the potential criticism, and then you end with a compliment. So you did a great job today. You need to work a little bit on your transitional statements. However, I feel you're improving, so compliment, whatnot. So there's always something to agree with. And I find by having students share, you work in that constructive criticism, but their initial is a compliment, and you end with a compliment. I find that to be very strong. The other thing that I'd like to point out is, I don't know if what I've said has made any impression, but all throughout grade school I was in the slow reading group. They tried to hold me back, but literally the nuns wouldn't let them. They said, no, someone else gets them next year. And all of a sudden in high school it clicked. And I think I've done okay. But I think that I usually bring that up when a student is struggling, saying they couldn't do it, or they whatnot. And I have friends who are very successful, who perhaps teach, and I'm thinking of a chemist friend of mine, but anyway, he failed chemistry his first time. No, he's just very well in that field. And having those stories and whatnot, of course from the UP, don't you know when I go home, what do you figure there, eh, is how I'm greeted. I don't know, but those are the kind of things that I feel are very important in conversation, so, in teaching. So I want to hear what Dr. Vickers has. So we started at the same time.
Pretty good, eh? I think after Dr. V, then we'll take a little break. We can resume and when we come back. We got something that needs to be up there.
I teach environmental ethics, and the course has been offered for 2 years now in the spring. And in the second class, after we get through all the administrative crap in the first class, I invite a Menominee elder and an Oneida elder to the class. And it's because it's an ITV class, so I have Menominee on one side of the TV, Oneida on the other side, and John has been my Menominee these last 2 years. And the question I asked them to address is, what is the relationship between humans and nature? And that's the way the question is framed in the literature they're going to read. The textbook that they read, it frames it that way. And the first thing we learned from John is that's a really funny way to look at that issue, because humans are part of nature. And so they learn not only that there's a different way of seeing it than the textbook is going to present, but that how you frame the question is all the difference. And so we come back to that throughout the class as we take up different issues. We come back to what we learned in that second class from these elders, and it puts that perspective right up beside the textbook. And I don't ask them to come down on one side or the other, just to consider them all and to consider them together. So it's a way of presenting different worldviews, the term we use. And they are importantly different in how ethics is handled. So that's worked really well in that class, I think. Thanks to John.
Thank you, Dr. B. Before we take our break, I just thought of something. When there's a connection between man and animals, or people and the earth. And this is something, I don't know how often we do this, but of course I saw the movie Avatar 3 times, I think. I thought, the Indian theme that's in there. But here's one thing. Don't call me weird now. I think it's important to take off your shoes and socks and walk in the earth sometimes, in the dirt and in the grass. I think because there's a connection between man, or people, and earth. And it's hard to get that connection with shoes on. Okay? And also my father-in-law, Manny Boyd, his ma used to tell him, it's a nice day out, there's dew on the grass. Go walk in that dew, in the morning. And it's good for you, she said, to walk in that dew. I don't know if you had sore feet or something, but I just did that the other day. I took my shoes off, got home from work, and I just stood on the grass, for a while, wiggled my toes. I said, I wonder if there's a connection between my feet and the sacred Kokamasa Grandmother Earth. We call it Grandmother Earth for ceremonial purposes. Kokamasa, our sacred Grandmother Earth. Even though, you hear the word Mother Earth. So, is that weird or what? I think it's something to it. There's something to it, yeah.
Something to it.
Because we always wear shoes, right? We get home, and if you don't wear shoes, then you put on your slippers, and very seldom the feet make contact with the earth. when I was growing up as a kid out in the country, I could run on gravel when I was a kid. You know, it was one of the things where you didn't wear shoes all summer, you know. There's a certain way to do it, though. You run lightly.
It helps if you're young and light. I wouldn't try running at your age, because I'm thinking you're deep.
There's a way to run lightly, I tell you.
When we're little kids.
So you don't hurt your 15 minutes break, shall we say? Resume.
Critical literacy course, and it involves project-based learning, which I think is an incredible way, a really powerful way for Native students to bring Indigenous knowledge to their learning. So what we do is we study, we research the literature. We start with the electronic databases that we get in the library, like EBSCOhost and what are the other ones? JSTOR, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's very little, very few publications available with a Native American emphasis or written by Native writers. And so it gives us an opportunity then to say, well, why is that? Why isn't there stuff published in the national or international databases? And it goes to what knowledge is valued and what is published. And students frequently get pretty upset about that in these electronic databases there isn't a lot of information or studies or research available. But as Dr. Patty taught me several years ago, that provides the opportunity to say, well, then it's your responsibility as future scholars and researchers and to contribute to that database, to make sure that Native voices are heard in mainstream databases or in mainstream literature. It's a really powerful moment for students when we struggle with that. And then we can switch over to Google and we find lots and lots and lots of resources of incredible work being done nationwide at tribal colleges and other organizations like Honor the Earth, lots of other organizations.
Google is a database?
No, we switch over to Google.
Oh, Google.
Yeah. We can't find it in the library databases, usually, or very, very little. And then so we Google. That's when they can find stuff. So what they do for their project is we start out with two articles, one about CMN and the importance of sustainability to CMN. Dr. V is quoted in it, in fact. It's a Blanchette article from the Sustainability Journal. And so students learn why sustainability is so important at CMN. And then that article has the focus on the forest and natural resources and environmental stuff. And so then we also read an article on cultural sustainability that a student found actually a few years ago by David Hall. And so then it helps us understand sustainability in much broader terms. Sorry. And then we move into the project, and that's where the research comes into play. So they have to find research related to our project. And the project is a partnership with the Sustainable Development Institute here. So we're working on one little piece of something that SBI is working on that's real and important. And in that project then, they're learning from the literature, the research that they're doing, but they also bring in their personal knowledge and their personal experiences. And I think project-based learning is just such a powerful, powerful way to learn, and really allows us to tap into the indigenous knowledge.
Subjugated knowledge.
Subjugated knowledge.
Yeah. Right on.
That's what I do too, in the sense that there's no one right answer, that kind of thing. But because I think it's gotten a lot better than when I first was here 13, 14 years ago, of the fewer that are coming right in and saying, well, just tell us what the answer is. But there are some of the non-native students that also still do that more often than the native students, just tell us what the answer is. But the thing, there's that, and then there's the idea of the trust and the getting acquainted, et cetera, and also there's been some comments about the diversity or the different kinds of backgrounds that people come in with, because there are so many different angles to that whole question of identity. You know, I mean, in one sense, there's that sense of, yeah, everybody has their identity, but the range is just so great in terms of from the traditional, from Zohar kind of thing, to the ones who were operas and adopted and didn't even know they're Indian until they were an adult, that kind of thing. I mean, they're just huge within the class. One of the things that has changed, too, over the time is that the percentage of non-natives in the classes has shifted, particularly with the nursing program. So that for the first time, I'm having classes of 30 that may only have 3 Native Americans in them.
Really?
Yes. Some of the earlier classes I had that did have that whole range from Zohar to the ones raised off the res, that kind of thing. There would be some of the non-natives, non-Native Americans, non-Indians, whatever, say like from Shawnee or whatever, who had never been to the reservation until they came to their first day of classes, that kind of thing. And so the interaction, since the topics, as you know, of my classes are mainly Native American issues, Menominee history, et cetera, like that, the content is going to lead them in that direction of kind of re-examining some of those things. But I really just have tried to let students kind of deal with it on their own terms, because there have been so many different kinds of identity growth issues that have happened, and some really beautiful things and some very good sorts of things. But again, for me anyway, it's been really important, as it is for the rest of you that I hear too, to have voices in the classroom beyond mine. In other words, that I'm one source of making comments, but that there are Native Americans in the class as well as Native American speakers that I have to come in, as well as the sources they can get otherwise, that are important in terms of feeding into what the knowledge base is for the whole classroom. Because each one of those has a very large thrust, including, for example, pre-contact history, and Dr. Overstreet does it too, of starting out validating oral history and making that sometimes the only source or the primary source of that sort of thing, as being very, very important, and the idea of indigenous knowledge across the board. This country is a bit behind Canada in validating that by far, but as well as some other places. But it's just that has been such a worldwide problem, as you know. And in terms of the kinds of group work and in terms of the sorts of approaches to the different projects, to have that be validated and have some of the learning outcomes be understanding and validating indigenous knowledge, that sort of thing, and promoting it, et cetera, is to me just a very, very important part about the climate for this course. And I've been so pleased with the help and support from all sorts of people, from forestry, well, certainly John and others too, that have just come in then and shared and brought that in as an important outside resource. So I don't know if I'll ever use the term subjugated knowledge. I guess I have to, because that's the reality, right?
Right.
Because I don't want to ever think of it as that.
Yeah.
But it is the case. Oh, I know one last one. One of the things, and that's why I was emphasizing that use of the term cultural repertoire, which really comes from two people that were at Iowa State several years back when I heard them do 2 days of presentations on diversity. One of them is Native American, the other was a bunch of different things. I mean, they both had the bi-cultural, whatever background too, but they went around and saying cultural repertoire to get away from making it bi. And there's several points there. One is that that's very Western-oriented, and again, that's a reality. So you can see I'm being a little stubborn in wanting to avoid having it be either Western or Indian. I want to have it be, and I don't want to use the term multicultural because I think that's been used badly too sometimes. So that's why I use that cultural repertoire idea, because it takes into account also the kinds of things Ryan was talking about. The reality that everybody comes from some basic lingo and culture and background or whatever that isn't standard English. And so while our whiteness represents the fact that, oh, you're the people of the standard English, whatever, actually, none of us grew up with it. We have to learn it, too, in terms of what the boundaries are. And so when it's a cultural repertoire, the assumption we're making then is that everybody is going to come with some things, and they're going to be building their cultural repertoire. And then using that wonderful adaptation you were talking about in terms of what a Native American approach would be in terms of the language as well as anything else. What works and what and so their idea is then, okay, you figure out, you learn what works in each situation. And then you pull out, you use what it is that's going to work from your cultural repertoire in different situations. I know when I was living in University City in St. Louis, we were in a neighborhood that had been all Jewish that had then gone all African American. And then they were trying to reintegrate it by renting certain houses to white people. So when my daughter started kindergarten, she and one other white girl were the only whites in kindergarten. And in the whole school, grade school up through 6th grade, there was one other white student. That was it, 3, and the rest were all African American. So, and she'd even been in preschool daycare that was all African American, and she came home one day and said, "Are other people at my school black?" Because they had started calling her the different terms they used for whites or whatever. And I asked her what she thought. And so she went through a whole cornucopia of colors for who the people were with her, and she was the only white student. And I said, okay, fine, okay, because I didn't want to push in certain directions there. I tended to not be good. I learned as much as I could and heard as much as I could in terms of black dialect. But in thinking back, I think I ended up kind of settling into a white version that was close, but they would go ahead always and talk in their black dialects of various kinds, because there were several. And then we'd communicate, okay? And here I've tended to, I've learned and I've heard, as you demonstrated, a range or a variety of different kinds of speech. And I think that I really like and I admire the approach that you and Lisa have been taking with that in terms of dealing with that in the classroom, because I think that's really important. But I also like that idea of it being sort of a cultural repertoire rather than just strictly either or. And I guess that's because I resist that Western thinking a lot. Now, granted, that got us to the moon, okay, whatever. But nevertheless, I really like to think of it more in terms of a cultural repertoire, that everybody's going to have a cultural repertoire of various types.
At the end, we're going to have, actually in about 35 minutes, we want to start the learning circle. And you just kind of gave away all your best lines for the learning circle.
Sorry.
But
She's probably got way more than that.
The United Nations has established an International Forum for Indigenous Knowledge, an annual event, and with the realization that the world needs to start listening to indigenous knowledge for the betterment of the planet, whether it's transcends the everyday existence, or if it's metaphysical in nature, it's still valid. And I want to get to that later to some degree. But one of these days, when I get a little bit more knowledge, I want to go to that United Nations and give them my 5 minutes of information for the record, and
Great.
just from the Menominee perspective, the way we see things, and make a contribution.
They have that every year.
Yeah, they just had it, I think, Nations International Forum on Indigenous Knowledge, yeah. Whew. Whoa, okay. We still want to get to how do we indigenize the curriculum. I think we've been talking all around it so far. We haven't specified saying you do this in here, you do this in math, you do this in environmental ethics or chemistry. That's the hard part. But I do want to say a few things about cosmology, epistemology, metaphysics, environment. And, it could take days to get through all of them. I've kind of really pared it down, and, I've always asked, I've consulted with Dr. Hall and Dr. Vickers on some of these topics to refine and to get a full understanding of them. But with cosmology, the heavens, there's a lot going on up there, more than solar flares that we just had recently. That's scary stuff. If they have a real huge solar flare, what happens to us, little tiny Earth? So it's almost like there's prayers that need to be made towards Father, Son, to have pity on us. Another Lincoln School story, my grandson, Manny Teller, he was in 3rd grade at Lincoln School, and it was tornado week, and on a few occasions, a lot of Indians put out tobacco when there's a bad storm coming. They get scared, and they pray to them thunder beings that are up there. So, have pity on us, And even a long time ago, some of the old-time Indians would put a TV pole, a tall pole in the yard. They'd tie a little bitty feather on top of there. So when the thunderbirds came over there, they'd say, "Oh, there's Indians living there. I better take it easy." I don't want to get into this whole concept of thunderbirds. But my grandson, Manny, they were in 3rd grade, and they're talking about tornadoes and safety week, and then how the warm front meets the cold front and it causes, okay. And so he raises his hand, he says, 3rd grade, his teacher says, "My grandpa can talk to the tornadoes." And the teacher says, "No, Manny, that's not true." He said, No, he can. Because he's been with me on a few times where, okay, here's what you do, man. He's a little guy. Tell him, sometimes I tell him in English and Menominee, because sometimes they think that the ones up there that we pray to can understand the Menominee better. But yeah, almost every Menominee I know, there's a bad storm, they'll get their tobacco out and say, "Oh God, it's scary," and they make a prayer. In the sky above, we believe there are 4 levels, with the first level being all the birds, all the winged creatures. If you think about it, it's quite an amazing gift. They can walk around, they can swim, they can also fly. We can only walk. So that's quite a gift. Plus, the further they fly, the closer they are to God. Way up there. So, today we can take a jet, but that's not the same. The second level up is the golden eagle, in charge of all the birds. The golden eagle is top one. And, of course, the feathers we use, and we pray to the eagle that they carry up our prayers, and the eagle's feathers have been way up there, thousands of feet. And in the eyes of the old-time people, they say, "Oh, boy, that eagle went out of sight. Must be up there by God." And later on, here the eagle comes back down to earth, and through various process, we gather the feathers. I said, well, these feathers have been up by God. Pretty special things, You can tap yourself with them, use them to pray with, because they've been blessed. and highly regarded. Eagle feathers are highly regarded. Okay, now, birds, golden eagle. Third level up is, we get into the mythological now, spiritual realm. That is the thunderbirds. Thunderbirds are up there. And we believe there are 12 of them. And each one of them have a different ability. One of them can make hailstorm. One can make a tornado to the point where it cuts the trees off. It breaks the trees off 10 or 12 feet up. One is the oldest one. One is the youngest one. Some of them bring the wind. So each one of them has a different job. And they're here in the spring, and apparently they leave town in the wintertime, after all the lakes and rivers are frozen. They say, okay, we can take a break now. I don't know where they go, but they go back. It's a significant thing in the springtime when the first thunderstorm is heard. And to this day, there's a lot of people, even some people have that name like that. When they hear the first thunderstorm, they got to immediately, as soon as they can, put tobacco out and give thanks. It's an indication that the thunderbirds came back, and they're here to protect the Menominee people, watch over them, not to bring harm, even though, tornadoes and thunderstorms. So that's what's happening up there. And then the last level up, that would be, well, when we say a prayer, we say, Mamao Kovnino, Father of all, the one God. So, from a world view perspective, we believe that there is one God up there. Everybody believes there's one supreme being, creator, great spirit, God, Father of all. And how we get to that one is the various different means in the world religions. But that's just a little bit about some of the heavens. A long time ago, let's see, what is that? In the east, anyway, there's a star. It's a planet, I think. And daylight, it's the last star you can see. It's the brightest star in the east. And we call that Wapano Ana, the eastern star. And they're even to the point where the Menominees had a certain group of people that would have a ceremony in honor just for that star. When we make a prayer for, like, a prayer of thanks, prayer of tobacco, we include all the things, all the things in the heavens, in addition to the Mao Kovnina, the Father above. Now, there's been always an ongoing war between the good spirits above and the evil ones below, and it's a real thin line. And here the humans are right on that edge of that. And the purpose of the ones above is to keep the upper hand compared to the evil ones, benevolent spirits. But in addition to the Creator and the thunderbirds and the eagle, there are 4 other significant spirits of the sky. Mainly, they call it grandfathers. There's a grandfather in the west, and a grandfather in the north, grandfather in the east, and grandfather in the south. And each one of them has a different ability. And Menominees do a sacred thing. They'll always start with the west, because that's where the thunderbirds come from, and that's where all the deceased ancestors have gone that way, through the heavens, through the Milky Way system. But a very significant direction, the west. Then we do things in a clockwise manner, so the next direction would be the north. It has the cold and snow and everything else. East is another significant direction, grandfather, because the sun comes up there every day. It gives the life-giving force of the sun. And sometimes the Indians will give tobacco in the early morning, and then late at dusk too. And scientifically speaking, I don't know where I heard this or read this, that the air is charged with more positive ions in the morning. When the sun first peeks over, there's more stuff going on, more positive energy. And that's the time when a lot of Indians will say a prayer and offer tobacco. And I guess the similar thing happens at dusk. Air, positive ions, I believe is the correct procedure, or correct term. And then there's salt. And so, in my personal opinion, the north is where the cold is, the south is where the warm is, and we're kind of in the middle, in the balance. And the west is the night, and the east is the day. We're kind of in the balance of there, too. So a balance is a big term with regard to Indian. And one last thing, there's more on cosmology, but one last thing about, that's kind of what I told you so far, that's the Menominee view. The Lakota have a legend, what that place is called, Devil's Tower? Bear Butte, the natives call it Bear Butte. They have a legend that these 7 girls, 7 sisters, were being chased by a bear, and they went up that butte, and this giant bear was after them, and that bear was clawing that butte. That's why they say it has them grooves in there like that. And the bear was going to get them. The Creator intervened, and he cast them 7 girls into the sky. He says, you are now going to become stars in the shape of the Big Dipper. That's a relatively common Lakota legend. So some people look at the sky and say, oh, there's them 7 sisters, huh? Yeah, the Big Dipper. There's more to the story. I give the summary, but I don't know. There's so much going on. The moon, Grandmother Moon. Significant in the cosmology of the people because, well, every 28 days is a full moon. And that's, the moon controls the water, and the sun controls the fire. The males are represented by the sun, the women are represented by the moon. But in the Indian calendar, there are supposed to be 13 months. Every 28 days is a full moon. 13 times 28 is 364 days in a year. And I've seen some of the different Indian calendars. Significant, the full moon meant a lot. It can move the ocean, the moon, or the tide issue. So when we look at the night sky or the day sky, it's a different view. Epistemology, just a Chippewa lady who teaches professor at UW Green Bay. How do we know what we know? What was the process we used to garner information, to garner indigenous knowledge? And the main thing that can be said there is the use of storytelling, oral history, oral tradition. And in the tribes, some people that was their job, their designation was to be the story keeper or the faith keeper, keeper of knowledge, stories. It was your job to pass these on through a regular process. And it's funny, some of the old stories have remained unchanged as they're passed along orally. And some of the songs have remained unchanged. They've done some music anthropological studies, and they've compared the song from the 1900s, 1910, to the modern day, and they've virtually unchanged the melodic qualities of the song. Similar to the stories. But, and then, I guess, it kind of gets back to the whole, the term of Wapit. Oh, on the door here, it says Wapitikua, Pinikinikane, which means they learn by observing room, a classroom. But with epistemology, the process of learning in an indigenous perspective was through the concept of Wapitaman, learning by observing and listening. And there was a set procedure for that. And there were designated people. The Lakota people were noted for recording history on the buffalo robe, big buffalo robe. Some of those robes are big as this table, just about 4 tables, or bigger. I forget what they call it, winter count. Winter count, they draw a little story on that robe of a significant event that happened that year, you know. And then they kind of made it into a spiral. Each picture represented a year. And, you know, there could be 50, 60, 70 years on a buffalo robe. Very sacred. It was kept, you know. They wanted to go through the history. They'd roll out the buffalo robe and say, well, back in 70 years ago, this happened, you know. And with the Menominees, I do know that they kept records on birch bark. A piece of birch bark, not on the white side, on the brown side of the bark. They had taken all, AWL, and puncture holes in there of stick drawings of people. And I saw one that showed the shape of the, it was actually bigger, the shape of the medicine lodge and where people sat. And here's the entrance, here's how it looked. And so they had picture drawings of history on birch bark, and I think it was in the Chicago Museum. Went there and with a group, and we got to go in the back room, and they pulled out the drawers with the, and you know, I think I was kind of startled. I said, "Whoa, this looks pretty old." I didn't even want to touch it. You know, they had them in the plastic things. And, oh wow, you know, some of the old ancient things. You need to start thinking, who made that? Why did they make that? How did they make that? You know? What was it for? So I just want to say that a little bit about epistemology. It's just a nice big word, but it talks about the process of gaining knowledge, as well as the responsibility elders had for passing it on. Had to do that. That was a must. Metaphysics, a very controversial thing. You know, modern science does not recognize metaphysical concepts. And when I say metaphysics, meta meaning beyond reality, physics meaning the physical world. So when we start talking metaphysics, we're saying beyond beyond the physical world. That's the way I define it. In all of our stories, so a lot of the stuff I'm telling you, is metaphysical in nature. The legend of Spirit Rock. Is there a person in that rock, or isn't there? Was this rock a person? We think so. A lot of people do. I was just up there the other day. There's tobacco up there. There's even people put coins now as an offering, silver coins, copper coins. People use that rock as a medium of prayer, because we believe there's a spirit in there. And in our language, we call a rock sun, one rock, more than one rock, Atsanyuk. Because it ends in uk, means that it's animate. So a rock is animate. We use them in the sweat lodge. We call them grandfather rock. We use the rocks for weapons, our spear points, arrow points, axes, life-giving properties of the rock, as well as an object of death for a weapon, you know. tomahawk, hatchet. And we pray to the rocks, especially for naming ceremonies, that the rock be good to that human, not to harm them. But definitely the legends and some of the cosmology, some of the storytelling goes beyond the physical world. And when we start talking about indigenous knowledge, there's a lot of that in there. I guess sometimes in Western culture they call it folk tales, mythology. You're going to find too that some of it is to your native students is real. It's not, oh, it's just a myth over there. My grandson said that I could talk to the, and I do. I make a prayer to the thunderbirds. But his teacher said, no, you can't do that. That's not true. But between my grandson and I, we know that's true. So, different perspective. Environment. I mean, so much should be said there. The concept of grandmother earth, when we say in our language, Kokamesa Kamekanau, our sacred grandmother earth. That's the word we use when we make a prayer, because the earth provides everything we need. Water, photosynthesis, medicine, shelter, food. It's all there. Whenever we shoot an animal, a deer or whatever, we always make a prayer, tobacco of offering, thanks. Whenever we cut a tree down, especially for ceremonial or uses, we always make a prayer first because we believe the trees are alive too, and we thank them. Whenever we dig into the groundbreaking ceremony, we have prayers and tobacco. Well, we got to do this for the benefit of the people. We got to dig a basement. But we view the water, sacred water, is all there. And sometimes it's hard to appreciate because we got modern facilities here, we have nice cars. I don't think anybody here goes to McDonald's anymore. But I did 2 days ago, and I was in a hurry. I had to get 2 cheeseburgers and a French fries and a Coke. I had bad taste in my stomach for a couple hours because I've been trying to cut back at McDonald's. Actually, I'm trying to go towards the 1491 diet. You ever heard that one yet? 1491? It's a good diet. It was how the Indians were eating before Columbus. Let's just say it's 1492, so we call it 1491. 1491, and it's taken off in Indian country. We have our national magazines, and it was a cover story a few weeks back. Natural food, vegetables, fruit, water, maple syrup, wild rice. Big story about the people in the Hualapai in the Grand Canyon, Arizona area. Desert people, a small tribe, 4, 5, 6, 700 in that little bitty reservation there, maybe 1,000, I forget how many. But they had almost 90%, 95% diabetes, and 95% of the people are overweight, obese, and their health problems were through the roof, especially diabetes and everything else. And they started looking at this, well, why is there such a high rate of diabetes in this particular community? And they started looking at their diet, and the people there had totally moved away from their natural foods, but they depended on government food provided by the United States Department of Agriculture, I guess, which we today call commodities, U.S. surplus food. Some sometimes you'll hear the word kamats, or kamads. Spam kind of meat, high fat, a lot of cheese, a lot of butter. Not real nutritious food. The white flour, white rice. And of course we know that flour is supposed to be brown and rice is supposed to be brown, but they bleach it, right? Bleach out so it looks better, because white is better. But they did this was about at least 10 years ago when the study was going on, and they made an effort to change the diet, and they made an effort to start going back to corn and the vegetables they grow, the pinyon nuts and all the wild foods that were in their area. And my God, the tribe got healthier. The obesity rate is down, diabetes rate is down, because they went back to the 1491 diet.
BC, before Columbus. The 1491 diet.
Yeah, 1491 diet, yeah. So, I mean, that's good. We should all try it. And it's hard. It's hard to do because, like I said, I broke my code the other day and got 2 greasy cheeseburgers, and I'm driving on the road and making my next appointment, right? So, but the other night we did have boiled dinner at home. Squash, beans, what else is in there? Potatoes, and fried side pork. I mean, I don't know what it is. A lot of Menominees love side pork. They even had them for sale at the Powell. Their side pork sandwiches, just 1 weekend out of the year, it's okay. Of course, the Muslims don't eat pork for obvious reasons. How do we indigenize curriculum? We got to do follow-up on that one. Okay. I mean, it's here, it's listed, but to give specifics, you can add what you can, hopefully, from what you learned here.
I was thinking, we were talking about the sacredness of life and animals. How about in a biology class, for example, when it's time to dissect a frog or something? To me, I would think that'd be a good opportunity to, this is
You got it.
offer tobacco.
Yeah.
Something,
Yeah, exactly. I think so. I mean, it is life.
Yeah.
It gets crazy because sometimes they hate to even step on ants. So it's life, or a big spider. I think if you're threatened, it's okay to kill, because you don't want them to fight. But a lot of people will get a glass, and put the paper underneath and take it outside, which is what you're supposed to do, right? As intellectual kind of people, as a sanctity of life. And even to the point where sometimes I walk around in the woods and you don't want to step on certain plants. I said, that's a good medicine there, that's a good one there.